to Sonoma Brain Trust. I am Chelsie Runnings with Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate, and I have my co-hosts with me, Mary Piasta with Haeuser, Valluzzo, Piasta, and Daren Blonski with
That was pretty good, Chelsie.
Wealth Advisors. Hey guys, I got this down now. And some of you might have noticed we took last week off. We needed a little break after the debates and the fires. We needed to catch up on some probably rest, I think. But we are back. It is still kind of like the first week in October, and there has been so much going on between fires, debates, COVID, Donald Trump getting COVID. And I think I want to start with Daren.
Try the whole White House, not just Donald Trump. The whole White House.
The whole White House, sorry. I want to start with
forward. Let's have October be over.
Yeah. I want to start with Daren and see what's going on in the financial markets. How have they been reacting to the debate that we had, the COVID outbreak? What are we seeing happening right now?
It's interesting, right? Because when President Trump announced after market close, it's been really interesting really to watch him throughout COVID, because he'll come out with certain announcements right around key market hours. And so he announced after market close that he had COVID, and immediately the future started selling off. Once they got into London hours, they recovered and have done pretty well. And the reason why they've done well, even though the President of the United States technically has had COVID, that it's because fiscal stimulus, right? There's a big expectation in the market right now. We're getting fiscal stimulus. So for our listeners who don't know the difference between monetary stimulus and fiscal stimulus, monetary stimulus is when the Federal Reserve prints money and gives loans and deals with interest rates. That's the stuff the Fed can do. And the Fed's basically done all that they can do within their mandate. There's still some other things they could do, but they're much more drastic. And I'm sure they're very hesitant to fully empty the powder keg, as they say. Fiscal stimulus is Congress spending money. Well, when the Fed does monetary policy, most of that money gets into the people who have pockets, not the people who don't have pockets. And that's why we saw a lot of disparity in distribution during the COVID crisis. We saw a lot more money go to those that have money and a lot less go to those who don't. And partially why we saw a lot of social unrest this year. And so what we've been waiting on is this fiscal response. And as of basically an hour and a half ago, Trump tweeted that negotiations are off with Pelosi. So they were filming this on a Tuesday and it's off. So therefore he's not going to negotiate. He's ordering no more negotiations on fiscal stimulus till after the election. Markets sold off immediately and went down, basically gave up all the returns for the last couple days. So it didn't sell off in a huge way, but it certainly spooked the market and was a pretty clear signal that, hey, fiscal stimulus is what this market's looking for. It also coincided with Jerome Powell, who runs the Federal Reserve, that says, look, if you guys don't get some fiscal stimulus in place, we're going to be in trouble economically. And then Trump called it off. I don't for a minute think that that's the case, that they're totally done having the discussion until the election. I do think they are all in major political zone and trying to position and pander to their parties and to their constituencies. The Dems have to look like they're actually doing something. The Republicans have to look like they're actually doing something. None of them are really want anything to happen, right? So thus you see this, a lot of talk and no action.
Here we go. We wait for the election.
Yeah.
Pretty much. I think it's going to be very difficult to get anything passed before the election, and that's really going to have be a huge headwind to the overall stock market, the economy. I do think after the election that we're going to get a lot of fiscal stimulus, and in big ways. I think I wouldn't be surprised. Now we're $27 trillion in debt. I wouldn't be surprised if into mid next year we're looking and staring down the pipe of at least $35 trillion in debt. Chelsie, you're on mute.
No, I was just
your mouth was just moving, but you weren't making noise.
Well, and what does that debt look like? I mean, as far as how will that impact us everyday Americans?
There's a lot of debate about that. I made a joke on Twitter today. I said, any politician talking about fiscal conservatism, is more or less delusional at this point. But that's okay because people still believe in Santa Claus. I mean, we're really shifting all of our economic frameworks right now, and that's kind of happening under the underpinnings of the economy. And there's something called modern monetary theory that is very likely going to be coming into play. I don't think we'll ever pay this debt off. I don't think that there'll ever be the political appetite to pay this debt off. I think ultimately we're going to look at things differently. So the way to deal with debt is we just change our paradigm to debt, and we create a whole new system for how we deal with debt, and it's called modern monetary theory. Now, the Republicans aren't going to call it modern monetary theory. They're going to make up some other fancy name because it was really came out of the Democratic side of the House. And more importantly, it came from Bernie Sanders' economic advisor. She kind of popularized it. And I can bet your bottom dollar that McConnell has no interest in being affiliated with Bernie Sanders and his economic advisors. So they're going to use some type of other framework or approach to it, I think. But more or less, we're not paying it off.
I have a question. So it seems, and you've told us this before, the stock market doesn't really care about our politics. They don't care who really wins. But if it comes down to a question of who the actual winner is after the election, is that going to throw our stock market into some sort of like frenzy?
Yeah, it could. I mean, if you go back and look at in recent history where we've had similar experiences, you saw the Gore, George W. Bush contested election, and it went to the Supreme Court. That's why it's such a big deal about this next Supreme Court nominee. And obviously the Democrats are not going to let that person get confirmed, if at all possible, because right now the court would be split, which would actually create more uncertainty and could bounce back to the House. And that's a whole nother thing. But if we get that other justice in place, then it's not going to be a split vote. And likely these justices will fall on party line if history precedes itself. But if you go back to that recent time in history, the market's really sold off, but nothing more than it was actually less than what we saw sell off in September. So markets tend to be forward thinking, they're pricing in. So like you saw today with Trump saying, hey, there's no fiscal stimulus, the market just dropped. Mm-hmm. And but they didn't drop all the way because I think the market's saying, yeah, we think he's pandering. We think he's using his tweet sword with the Democrats today. So I wouldn't go out there and say the markets are going to implode. What's true is that the markets like certainty. So the more certainty we have in the markets, and the more certainty we have politically, economically, the more likely we are to see the markets continue to move forward. What they're feeling very certain about, and what is trumping everything, and I don't mean to oxymoron use Trump, but what is basically making everything a non-point is fiscal stimulus, because fiscal stimulus is so powerful for the stock market. And a lot of the people who get it, they shove it into the stock market. So if we get it, markets get to rip and roar up.
So speaking of certainty, Mary, let's talk about how people can plan for their future and set some things in stone. I know right now people are losing their homes and COVID cases are up, which means people are likely losing their lives because of it. What can people do to plan for certain for their future in terms of protecting their legacies?
Right. So in the legal world, there are tools that are in place depending on the state in which people live that can provide certainty over their decisions that they want to have made and then their financial estates. And when it comes to the financial estates after death, really the biggest tool that is out there is what's called a trust. And the trust is a vehicle that can help people decide ahead of time where they want their assets to go, and it enables folks to get their assets to those people without having to go through a court process. Now, again, I say that this is state specific. So here in California, the trust is a huge vehicle. In other states, other countries, it's different. So you really need to know where you are and what the governing paradigm is. But it's a huge way that people can list out and specify where they want their things to go. And there's a lot of bad information out there. People will say that they don't need trusts, but it's important to understand the threshold criteria as well for that. So,
a time when you, like a time that's too early for you to get a trust, or maybe you don't need a trust? What are ideal times to have a trust?
well, if we're going to talk just trust, I mean, it's part of a larger conversation on legal tools to have the life you want. So my clients who have kids who are in college, when those kids are adults, I make sure that they also have advanced healthcare directives for them and powers of attorney for their adult children. Those are the documents during life that enable people to have the decisions made that they need to. And then once people transition into the after, then the documents that come into place are wills and trusts and other tax-related planning tools. So when you're talking about the legacy planning, the after-death planning, the time to start looking at implementing a trust, if we're just going to talk about trusts, is when an estate in California reaches a certain size, and that size is $164,000. Now, the courts don't care about your debt load. So people will say, well, you know, I have a house, but I really didn't put anything down on it. So I really don't own any of it. Well, that doesn't matter. What matters is that you have an asset in your name that is over that threshold. So once you have assets of that size and you have a specific idea of where you'd like them to go, and also you want to maximize the amount of money that goes to the people you want it to go to, then it's time to start talking to an attorney and make those sorts of plans. So for our dear president, I surely hope that he has his trust in order. Although COVID isn't that bad, right?
It's the plague that's not as bad as the flu, you guys.
But yeah, I mean, so it's, you know, really, it's as people grow their estates, you know, it's important to consider the legal tools that you want to support the decisions you want to have done.
And I always tell my clients, my buyers, when they've purchased a house, they need to start reaching out to attorneys and discussing their estate plans to at least make sure that their real property is protected from having to go through probate with their families.
Yeah, and I think that that's really solid advice, and you're doing your clients a huge service, because the other end of that, if people choose not to engage in that planning and actually get it done, what happens is that house gets held up in a court proceeding. So, you know, the result of that is that a percentage of that estate then goes to people who are doing the work, the court,
The lawyers,
right? Instead of to the people who need it most, you know, and for, you know, young families with kids, I mean, they want that money and they want to preserve, most of my clients, I'll say, they want that, you know, that asset preserved for their, you know, the people in their home, for their kids, for their spouses, for whoever they're leaving it to. So it, you know, it is a really great vehicle for that.
that's why I always say to clients, I say, hey, either pay them now and a little bit or pay them later and a lot. But your family isn't going to be happy about the second.
No, and it, you know, some people say, oh, well, we have, you know, transfer on death accounts and all this, and, you know, I'm going to have my sister just distribute my whole estate to people. And, you know, there's a really long conversation to have about that. For some situations, maybe it would work. Who am I to judge? But as far as really securing the appropriate way and the most economical way of transferring legacies, it's to have it in a contract, which has different names, and in California it's trust. So it's like, do it now, pay a little bit. Absolutely.
So Chelsie, Mary was just talking about real estate and having a trust. There's a lot of people still buying in the Valley, right?
A lot of people trying to buy in the Valley still.
Why are they still, that mean we just don't have enough properties out there, or?
Yeah, we definitely don't have enough inventory. We did see a slight dip in buyer interest and mortgage applications during that last holiday weekend we had. And then afterwards, we saw an increase again in interest and mortgage applications. But the real situation is that we just don't have enough inventory to meet the demand. And now with our fires and the homes that have been and will continue to be lost until the fires are contained, we're going to have even more demand than what our inventory is going to be able to match. So really the holdup is heavily on the lack of demand right now. It's not that the buyers aren't out there, it's that there's nothing out there for the buyers to purchase.
It's interesting. I was looking at some land and looking at some of these properties. We were working with one client who was burned down, and they have a big ranch, and talking with them. And the way it's structured is if you have over 20 acres of land and your house burns down, the way the banks look at that now is that's just considered land. It's not considered built land at all. And they don't care about any of the infrastructural improvements. So anyone with over 20 acres of land and has a burned down house, that's a really interesting new predicament. In a lot of these fires, like with the glass fire, with the LNU complex, we're in big rural areas where big ranches got burned down. And it's an interesting kind of difficult situation that I think homeowners have to decide on, are they going to rebuild or not rebuild? But if they don't rebuild, then you have empty land that's not worth nearly what you think it is.
Well, and it's also going to create a zoning issue. So for some cities like Napa, they have requirements as to where people can build, right? And they have outlined the parameters. So then will these jurisdictions expand that and reconsider based on the new demands, like for the future? I think it's an interesting thing to think about, right? Because it's like, if you need to build more homes, like how are you going to do it? We have like finite areas that are buildable.
You know, I don't know the laws on this, but I was talking to one agent and they were telling me that there's only a certain amount of parcels that I guess that get designated in any area. So cities and counties are very reluctant to let pieces of property get parceled up into smaller parcels, because if they give that lot line to this owner, then they have one less they can give somewhere else.
Well, we should look into that and do a
We
whole.
should. We'll have to cover that in another fantastic episode of Sonoma Brain Trust. Well, there you have it, folks. Another episode of Sonoma Brain Trust. We hope you all have a better week and you all are breathing a little lighter than we were all last week. It looks like the fires are, for the most part, put out. They're not advertising they're contained, by the way, but that's normal. They don't advertise that they're contained because then they lose resources. But I think it's pretty much on mop up at this point.
Woohoo! Yay!
Yeah.
So Chelsie, you can chill now.
Chill now. Well, okay, guys. I'll see you later. Stay safe and
Take care,
because it's wild right now.
Right?
That's true.